a lot of times we're assessing value based on very limited clinical trials that aren't necessarily very diverse, and so they don't necessarily make up a large population that's diverse and different ethnicities, et cetera. And so I think that's another challenge, is to make sure that we have robust clinical trials, but that we're also looking at evidence that's post-market that oftentimes patient organizations are generating to help us understand what's happening in the treatment world.
Really considering endpoints that matter to patients and including this in the very design of the clinical trial is key. So understanding your customer, if you wish, but in a very meaningful and insightful way. And of course, I mean, information provision, unbiased, transparent, and very objective information, which is something, again, we're all striving to take to our patients. We could join our efforts there by all means. And I believe it also helps you to understand where, you know, what you're working on would take you and how it would impact the community for which you're developing it, right?
Absolutely. The last thing we want to do is develop something that we're shooting for this target and we find out the target's over here. That's not good for anybody. And for an industry like ours, you know, we only do well when patients do well. So we want patients to do well. And that's really important for us, because that allows us to take that learning to another level and help even more patients do well. It's not just a one-time event that patients are involved as well. And I think the further upstream, and what do I mean by that? I think the further in the drug development process, at least speaking on behalf of Ipsen and an innovative research-based, you know, pharmaceutical company, is having patients engaged early. So as we design clinical trials, we look for endpoints that really matter to patients. You know, there certainly are endpoints that are important for the regulators to make sure the product is safe and effective, but there's also other endpoints that really make a difference for patients. And we need to look for those endpoints as early as possible. And sometimes we may not know what those endpoints are. We think they are a certain endpoint, and then talking to patients, we learn it should be a different endpoint. So we have a much more, a richer dialogue. But I think it's having that conversation earlier, and this is something that's very important to us. And then throughout the development process and all the way through the approval process and then ultimately access for patients is very important. So couldn't agree more with everything you all are saying.
I think that's key, and especially, as you say, from day one, because for the patient community to be involved and to be a real advocate of what's happening, we have to be there and to understand, you know, from the very first day of creation, why is this clinical trial designed, what is the benefit that it would bring to patients, and not just for recruitment reasons, but for, you know, for the sake of really making sense of what's going on with this disease and with the tackling of it.
I think from the pharmaceutical company perspective, I think to the extent that they can support those patient-centered registries, the development of patient-reported outcomes, that from a post-market standpoint especially, that can be, I think, extremely useful. And then using that information to innovate, right, so that when you create new clinical trials and you're innovating new products, you're looking to achieve then the outcomes that really do matter to patients.
Yeah, I think it will be very beneficial then when you can show that you really cooperate with patients and that we all see the needs that we are going to support. So helping patients and healthcare, and not only all profits. So we are not. So there's a greater cause for this, and that we are working together from the scratch and really understanding each other. So this is not something that this is just done by a company. This is something to really help everyone.
I think what's of paramount importance and what luckily is happening nowadays is that we go from treating the disease to treating the patient, which I think is what all efforts should be focused around ultimately.